There is a kind of pain that doesn't scream. It doesn't throw plates across the room. It doesn't send 13 texts in a row. It doesn't beg. It doesn't collapse dramatically at the doorstep of the person who left. It just sits there, deep in the chest, like cold water filling a locked room. Quiet, patient, unseen. And if you've ever loved someone avoidant, you know this pain. Because nothing confuses the nervous system more than being deeply felt one moment and emotionally abandoned the next. One day they look at you like you are the safest place they've ever known. The next they go distant, their words flatten, their touch cools, their eyes stop resting on you. And suddenly you are left trying to decode a silence that feels louder than any rejection you've ever heard. You replay everything. Did I ask for too much? Did I feel too much? Did I get too close? Did I ruin it by loving them honestly? And this is where most empaths get trapped, not in the loss itself, but in the meaning they assign to it, because an empath doesn't just feel heartbreak. They study it, they enter it, they try to heal it from the inside. They feel the other person's fear, the other person's confusion, the other person's hidden wounds, and they turn that sensitivity into loyalty, into patience, into endless emotional labor. They don't walk away when things get hard. They stay longer than they should, and that is the brutal truth. Sometimes the very depth that makes you beautiful is the same depth that teaches avoidant people they can disappear and still be emotionally held by you. That's the part no one wants to say out loud. Your understanding can become the cushion for their avoidance. Your compassion can become the bridge they never have to build themselves. Your softness can become the excuse they use to delay intimacy while still feeding on the comfort of being loved. Not because they are evil, but because avoidance is not just distance. It is regulation. When an avoidant person starts to feel too much closeness, too much dependency, too much emotional exposure, their system doesn't interpret that as romance. It interprets it as danger. Their body reacts before their mind can explain it. The amygdala scans for threat. Cortisol rises. The nervous system shifts into protection. And what looks to you like coldness often feels to them like survival. So they pull back, not always because they stopped caring, but because caring started costing them too much. That's what makes this dynamic so devastating. You are trying to move closer precisely when they are being driven farther away by their own inner alarm system. You call it connection. Their body calls it engulfment. You call it honesty. Their body calls it pressure. You call it love. Their body, shaped by old emotional scarcity, sometimes experiences it as a loss of control. And if you are an empath, this is where you break your own heart trying to translate for them. You tell yourself they're scared. You tell yourself they need space. You tell yourself they've just been hurt before. You tell yourself if I can just love them gently enough, they'll finally feel safe. But here is the truth that changes everything. Empaths leave a permanent mark on avoidance not because they stay forever, but because when they finally stop, the avoidant feels the loss in a way they can't escape. Not at first. At first, when you go quiet, they may look unaffected, almost relieved. Their nervous system gets what it wanted: room, distance, emotional oxygen, no heavy conversations, no pressure. No mirror reflecting back the intimacy they're not ready to sustain. On the surface, they seem fine, maybe even lighter, and that's the moment that fools people. Because what is absent in an avoidant is rarely absent forever. It is delayed. Avoidants often don't process loss in the moment of separation. They process it in the vacuum that comes after. When the stimulation fades, when the threat of closeness is gone, when the body settles enough for buried attachment to rise. And that is when your absence starts becoming louder than your presence ever was. Because empaths do something to avoidance that casual connections cannot. They reach places inside them that were defended for years. An empath notices the micro-shifts, the swallowed emotion, the way their voice changes when they are pretending they don't care. The way their body tenses when tenderness appears. The way they offer fragments of vulnerability and then panic after giving them. An empath feels all of that, and instead of mocking it, they hold it carefully. That kind of being seen is dangerous for an avoidant, because part of them wants it more than anything. And another part of them has built an identity around not needing it. So when you love them deeply, calmly, attentively, you don't just become another person in their life. You become evidence. Evidence that intimacy can feel real. Evidence that someone can sense what they never say. Evidence that they are not as unreadable as they pretend. Evidence that underneath all that distance, someone found a pulse. And once that happens, they may run from you, but they do not erase you. That is why empaths leave a permanent mark. Not because they were louder, not because they played harder games, not because they were harder to get, but because they reached the wound without humiliating it. Think about that. Most avoidants have spent years mastering emotional minimization. They downplay feelings to feel in control. They intellectualize pain. They detach before anyone can define them. They convince themselves they are just independent, just busy, just not that emotional, just not ready. But then someone deeply sensitive enters their world and starts responding not only to their words, but to what trembles underneath them. That can feel intoxicating at first. There is dopamine in being understood without having to explain yourself. There is relief in being loved by someone who doesn't require performance. There is safety in someone who doesn't punish your awkwardness, your slowness, your emotional confusion. But the closer this gets, the more the old wiring activates. Because now they are not just being liked. They are being known, and being known means they can be affected. It means they can be hurt. It means they can need. It means they can lose. For someone avoidant, that is often the most terrifying thing of all. So they start doing what they've always done. They go a little numb. They take longer to reply. They become less expressive. They create emotional static. They act unsure. They say they need time. They tell themselves the spark is fading. They start focusing on your intensity instead of their fear. And you, if you are not careful, begin shrinking yourself to keep the bond alive. You become calmer than you really feel, more understanding than you really are, more patient than your heart can sustain. You swallow your needs to avoid overwhelming them. You call your grief maturity. You call your silence giving space. You call your loneliness love. But love that requires self-erasure is not love, it is adaptation. And the empath's greatest mistake is believing that if they suffer beautifully enough, they will be chosen. No, what marks an avoidant is not the empath who keeps bleeding at their feet. It is the empath who finally stands up, becomes still, and leaves with their warmth intact. That is the moment everything changes. Because there is one core concept avoidants never forget: silence from someone who truly understood them, not angry silence, not manipulative silence. Not performative silence designed to provoke a reaction. Real silence. The kind that comes when someone finally accepts that they cannot love another person into emotional readiness. The kind that comes when someone stops chasing, stops explaining, stops overextending, and simply returns to themselves. That silence carries a different energy. It is not punishment, it is removal. And removal is what makes the avoidant feel the shape of what they lost. Because while you were there, part of them relied on your emotional presence more than they admitted. Your good morning text. Your patience with their slowness. Your ability to sense when something was off. Your softness after they withdrew. Your steadiness after they disappointed you. Your faith in what they could become. All of it was absorbed, even when it wasn't reciprocated properly. Especially then. Now imagine the moment that disappears. They wake up and there is no warmth waiting for them. No emotional doorway left open. No familiar energy leaning toward them. No one gently reading between the lines. No one offering understanding before they even ask. No one carrying the emotional atmosphere anymore. At first, they may distract themselves. Work, friends, gym, screens, noise, new attention. Anything to keep the system stimulated enough to avoid reflection. But emptiness is patient. And eventually, a certain kind of night arrives. It is late. The room is dim. The dopamine from distraction wears off. Their body is tired enough to stop performing, and suddenly your absence is no longer abstract, it is sensory. They remember the way you looked at them when they were trying to act unaffected. They remember the conversations where you understood things they never actually said. They remember the softness in your voice when they expected judgment. They remember the safety they felt and then sabotaged. They remember how deeply you cared and how rare that actually was. This is when avoidance turns inward, not always into action, but into obsession, because the one person they thought they could return to later is no longer emotionally available in the same way. And that destabilizes them. The person who used to reach now has boundaries. The person who used to soothe now has self-respect. The person who used to wait has moved their life out of the waiting room. That is when they begin to feel what your presence was doing for them, not just emotionally, biologically. Connection regulates. Familiar affection regulates. Predictable emotional warmth can soothe the nervous system even in people who fear it. And when that regulation disappears, the body notices. The mind may call it missing you. The nervous system calls it withdrawal. So now they check your page, your name, old messages, tiny digital traces. They wonder if you're talking to someone else. They replay the last conversation. They remember your face when you finally got tired. They feel the sting of your dignity. And here is the irony. The more peacefully you leave, the louder you become inside them, because chaos is easier to dismiss. But calm departure forces reflection. If you beg, they can label you as overwhelming. If you chase, they can hide behind pressure. If you protest loudly, they can focus on your reaction instead of their behavior. But if you simply see the truth and walk away, now there is no smoke to hide in, only consequence, and that consequence is the mark empaths leave, not a scar made of drama, a scar made of contrast. You become the standard against which shallow connections start failing. The next person may be easier, more detached, less demanding, more casual, but they won't feel like you. They won't reach those inner rooms. They won't carry that same emotional depth. They won't create that same mix of terror and tenderness. And part of the avoidant, whether they admit it or not, will know it. They may try to recreate the feeling. They may miss you in pieces. They may not even have the language to say what happened. But they remember. They remember being loved in a way that touched their defenses. They remember someone who saw them and did not flinch. They remember someone whose absence forced them to face themselves. That is permanent, but now comes the warning. This is the moment many empaths ruin their own transformation. Because when the avoidance circles back, and many of them do in some form, the old hunger can wake up instantly. One message, one look, one late-night apology, one vague confession. One small sign of softness, and suddenly your body remembers the whole story and wants to reopen the door. Be careful. Missing you is not the same as being ready for you. Obsessing is not the same as changing. Regret is not repair, and temporary vulnerability is not emotional availability. If they return unchanged, they will only use your empathy to restart the same cycle at a more sophisticated level. They will say more, reveal more, promise more, even believe themselves more. But if they have not learned how to stay present when intimacy rises, if they have not built the capacity to tolerate closeness without retreating into self-protection, then your love will once again be asked to carry what their healing should. Do not confuse being unforgettable with being chosen well. You can leave a permanent mark on someone and still be completely wrong for their current level of emotional maturity. That is a hard truth. But it is freedom, because the point of this story is not to become so magnetic that avoidants chase you forever. The point is to become so grounded in your own worth that whether they chase or not no longer determines your value. That is the shift. The real power dynamic flips not when they text first. Not when they admit they miss you. Not when they realize what they lost. It flips when you no longer need their delayed clarity to confirm what you always were. You were not too much. You were accurate. You felt the disconnection because it was there. You felt the fear because it was there. You felt the love because it was there too. Your pain was not proof that you were weak. It was proof that you stayed connected to reality while someone else was splitting themselves away from it. And now, the work is not to become colder, not to become avoidant in response to avoidance, not to harden into someone who no longer feels. No, your work is finer than that, to keep your depth without offering it where it is only consumed, to keep your tenderness without turning it into self-betrayal, to keep your sensitivity without making it responsible for rescuing emotionally unavailable people. To stop treating your intuition like a burden when it has always been your compass. Because when an empath truly wakes up, they stop asking, how do I make them realize my value? And they start asking, why was I so willing to pour sacred energy into someone who could only receive me in fragments? That question changes everything. It returns you to yourself. It teaches you that your love is not a public utility. It is not an endless resource for the undecided. It is not medicine for people committed to misunderstanding their own wounds. Your presence is expensive. Your softness is rare. Your emotional precision is rare. The way you feel people, the way you notice what others miss, the way you hold complexity without running from it, that is rare. And rare things are not meant to beg for recognition. They are meant to be recognized by the right nervous system, by the right heart, by the right level of readiness. So if you have left a permanent mark on someone avoidant, let that be enough. Let it teach you something holy. You do not need to go back and make sure they understood. You do not need to stay available for the day they finally have language for what they destroyed. You do not need to stand by as proof of your own goodness. Some people will understand your value only in your absence. That is their lesson, but your lesson is different. Your lesson is to stop abandoning yourself just because someone else is afraid of being loved deeply. And when that finally lands, something inside you changes forever. You stop romanticizing being the one who stayed the longest. You stop confusing emotional endurance with destiny. You stop seeing your pain as evidence of a profound connection and start seeing it, sometimes, as evidence that you were overfunctioning in a bond that could not hold you. And then quietly power returns. Not loud power, not revenge power, not the power of making someone crawl back. The power of clean self-respect. The power of no longer negotiating your worth with emotionally divided people. The power of walking away before your spirit has to beg your body to survive another round. The power of becoming unavailable to what destabilizes your peace. The power of knowing that the deepest mark you can leave is not on them. It is on yourself. The moment you decide that your empathy will no longer be used against you, your whole identity begins to reorganize. You become calmer, clearer, less hypnotized by inconsistency, less seduced by potential, more devoted to reciprocity, more loyal to peace, more intimate with your own standards. And suddenly the person who once waited to be chosen becomes the person who chooses. That is the transformation. That is the ending they never expect. Because the empath they remember was always reaching. But the one they cannot stop thinking about is the one who finally remembered their own power, closed the door softly, and never again confused being deeply felt with being deeply valued.